Annalee heard her father's laughter from the parlor, and brightened at that slow, measured chuckle, almost like the ticking of a pocket watch, but deep and comforting. She all but ran for the parlor door, but then stopped short at the sound of a stranger's voice. Under any circumstances, this sign of an unfamiliar presence in the house would have been enough to quicken her breath, to make her light-headed for an anxious instant before she forced the old fear down and summoned enough pluck to at least approximate self-assurance. But there was something about this voice that kept the summons from coming. It had a deliberate, melodious quality that might have reminded her of her father's had it been older. But though the voice had Papa's gentleness, its accent, almost arrogant in its aristocracy, made her dig her fingernails into her palms as she squeezed both her hands into fists. This voice belonged to a Southerner. Annalee attempted to swallow with a dry throat, and closed her eyes against the urge to glance out the nearest window, for if she glimpsed the world beyond the house, she would run toward it and the protection it might afford. She would not give ground. She would do as her brother would have done. She would not allow the presence of a Southerner, a man whose cause had led Tom to die in Washington in the uniform she herself had sewn, to intimidate her. She would stride through that door and not question why her father should have brought the man here, why he should have saved his life, as he so obviously must have done, and she would confront this face that must now be put on the nameless, rebellious horde that had destroyed the life she had known. "We thought it best to keep the uniform until people get accustomed to—" Papa turned at her entrance. "Annalee, come in. Where have you been keeping yourself?" Annalee only blinked for a moment at the stranger in a blue uniform, with the right pant leg pinned up where a knee should have been. He was reaching for his crutches against the wall behind him. Her mind took several seconds to reconcile the accent with the Union trappings, and in that time she could articulate no words to draw attention away from the confusion and then guilt that showed on her face. "Captain Teague, Scott. This is my younger daughter, Annalee." The captain braced himself on one crutch and struggled to stand before she finished crossing the room to him. "It is a pleasure, Miss Warner." He made an awkward bow and took her hand. She gawped at him before she remembered that she should make some kind of reply. "Captain?" Once again she wanted nothing more than to seek refuge outside, but instead she sat next to Lucy on the sofa. "I was just saying we should give folks in town a chance to meet the captain in his uniform, so they don't get the wrong idea when they hear him speak," Papa said. Annalee nodded and looked down to where Lucy had grabbed onto her arm and was staring out from around it at the young man's attempt to sit back down. "What regiment were you with, Captain?" Mama asked from her chair beside Papa. 11th Maryland, ma'am. Our company was all university men." "And you were their captain?" "No, ma'am, I never received a command. My promotion was a bureaucratic oversight that came a bit late for that." "Nevertheless, it is an honorable distinction for you, I'm sure," Annalee said, hoping to make up for her thoughts before seeing him. His quizzical expression told her that she had mistaken him yet again, but perhaps it was a mistake she could mend. "It shows the Army's appreciation of your sacrifice to the Union." His expression transformed into one of indulgence after half a second, and she knew he thought her a simpleton. "Yes, of course." "I have to assume you were in the East. Did you by any chance know Tom Warner?" Mama asked, and Annalee decided she would just watch the sunlit dust motes near the floor and hope for the conversation to end, or for Rebecca to call for her, or for anything to happen that would take her out of that room. "I don't believe I recall the name," Captain Scott answered. "He was in the cavalry." "Oh, well, infantry and cavalry don't converse much, so I really wouldn't have had an opportunity to meet him." "He's a grown man, and I love him dearly. But if I could have him here right now, I'd box his ears for leaving us so long without any word. He knows better." "I'm sure it's no fault of his. The post these days is unpredictable. We had men in camp receiving letters several months after they were written, because they'd been misplaced or misdirected to another regiment. I wouldn't worry. He probably has 5 letters waiting for some postmaster to realize they ought to be here," the captain assured her. My dear, I'm in time to see my pears in bloom. Papa put his hand on Mamma's. Shall we take a walk among them? Wonderful. I'll get my bonnet. Please excuse me, Captain. Papa pointed to Captain Scott as Mamma left the room. And you, my boy, could do to exercise that leg. Come out with us. Yes, sir. Annalie was silent as she kept her pace slow for Captain Scott and watched her parents converse several feet in front of them. She cursed the sense of propriety that had led her father to suggest that she accompany them too, when she had tried to sneak back upstairs. It must not have rained as much here as it did in Canton, Captain Scott said, stopping to tap the nearly dry ground. I'd have thought we'd be trudging through the mud. Were the roads bad there? In places. Did you come through Newkirk? No, we took the more direct route because the creek was passable. Your father and I were discussing riding in on Monday, though, when Dr. DePriest checks on his office. Oh. Annalie fumbled with the fringe on her shawl. I should probably tell you something about Mama, since you'll be with us for a while. I already know. Dr. DePriest told me. She raised her eyebrows at the easy lie he'd told in the parlor. In that event, thank you for humoring her. He nodded. Papa and Mama had stopped ahead and were waiting for them. I want to have a look at my apples, Papa said when they caught up. You might want to head back. Those trees aren't on as level a plot as these are. If it's agreeable to Miss Warner, I could stay out a bit longer, the captain replied. Good, good. It shows your strength is coming back. Only stay on the high ground. He offered his arm to Mama and then started down the slight grade. Annalie motioned the way to go. It is nice out today. It's been such a long while since I've been able to do this sort of thing. I hadn't realized how much I missed it, Captain Scott said. You'll like it even better in the summer. Yes, at dusk when you can just hear the transition from bird song to cricket chirping, when you can breathe long and deep of dewy air until right before you think you'll drown in it. A soldier and a poet. No, it was something my mother said once that I've been saving for use in conversation. You shouldn't have told me. I can't say you're brilliant now. He smiled and then looked to the ground in front of him. Annalie followed his gaze to the shadow of small spring leaves waving in the sunlight. You'll get a headache watching them, she said, before looking up at his face. His breathing was shaky and his jaw tight. Captain, are you well? Captain. She put her hand on his shoulder. He looked over to her, gasped, and held the breath for a moment before letting it out in a low sentence. Don't call me Captain. I'm not in the army any more. She stared back. Certainly. He broke the gaze. I'm sorry, he said. Sometimes I can be a bit on edge. Tuesday, 20 September 1853. I haven't written for several days because Will has been sick abed all this time. He seems to be getting better now, so I have time to write about the whole ordeal. Father had asked me to check on the progress of harvesting the north field, and I was reasonably happy to oblige him, since that's where he's placed Henry. I had planned on being able to take some ginger water out to him and sit in the shade of the wagon and take our time discussing how the work was going. A generally fine day. But Will came along down the path about an hour after me, running a barrel ring and yelling something about whatever tribe of Indians he was fighting that day. The ring got away from him and rolled over to Henry and me. I suppose it was meanness in me, but I wouldn't let him have the ring back. So he got angry the way he does, with the stomping and the kicking and the wishing I was dead, and he splashed most of the ginger water all over me. I chased him into the field, in and out of the cotton and around the slaves, who were telling me I was too old for chasing, but I didn't care. Suddenly Will cried out, and I rejoiced at the thought of his having bruised his heel on a rock. But when old Webb raised his hoe high and struck at the ground with deadly aim, I got scared. Sure enough, it was a rattler that had made Will cry. I pushed through the crowd that had gathered, and already I could see his foot swelling. I gave my knife to Webb, who cut into the bite and started sucking out the poison. I carried Will to the wagon, while Webb kept sucking at his heel, and then I drove back to the house so hard I thought the wheels would fly off. There's nothing much worse than sitting in a darkened parlour and waiting for the doctor to come downstairs to give the news of life or death. Father wouldn't allow Mother in Will's bedroom at all, so she sat there with me down there, not saying a word, not crying even, though Father had expected her to become hysterical. She alternated between reading her Bible and staring at me. Nursey asked to take Caroline out of the house for a walk once that afternoon, but Mother very calmly refused and kept staring at me. I didn't dare leave the parlour for fear I would break her calm and bring down the wrath I deserved. She cried only after the doctor told us Will was out of danger. She hugged me round the neck, having to reach up further than I ever before realized, and only then did she tell me what she had been thinking when she stared at me for whole minutes at a time. That as fervently as she had prayed that she would not lose another son, she asked God more urgently that I should not have the guilt of an accident follow me through life.